Promoting free trade, a push for peace and saving the environment. We'll take a look at the BRICS Summit. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu and this is The Heat. As the 17th BRICS Summit concludes in Rio de Janeiro, the economic bloc's relevance in global affairs is growing. BRICS GDP in purchasing power parity is now larger than the G7's. Originally composed of Brazil, Russia, India and China, then expanded to include South Africa, and now with 6 more members, the group is positioning itself as a powerful voice for the global South. Paulo Cabral reports.
Earlier this year, Brasilia hosted a meeting of BRICS national security advisors, one of several high-level events leading up to the summit in Rio de Janeiro. Senior officials from the group discussed how BRICS can respond to geopolitical tensions while promoting peace and cooperation.
In this new phase of BRICS, we must ensure that multipolarity is grounded in true multilateralism. We don't want to return to an archaic international order, nor do we wish for a new Cold War.
As BRICS president in 2025, Brazil adopted the motto, strengthening global South cooperation for more inclusive and sustainable governance. Within this framework, the country is proposing that the group prioritizes partnerships to foster social, economic and environmental development.
That message was reinforced during a BRICS Finance Track event in São Paulo, where government officials presented Brazil's priorities to civil society representatives.
I think it's a dialogue we must do with all regions, all countries of the world, so that we can preserve the multilateral system, preserve the global economic order that has been significantly helpful for countries to reduce poverty and to increase prosperity of their societies, as we have been observing since the end of the Second World War.
Some participants expressed hope that BRICS can support a new global agenda focused on inclusion and development.
A BRICS meeting brings hopes of building a different kind of global politics, with China's rise and a focus on social and economic inclusion.
With its recent expansion to include Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE, Iran, Ethiopia and Indonesia, BRICS and its institutions, such as the New Development Bank, are increasingly seen as platforms for alternative cooperative arrangements. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, São Paulo.
Okay, to talk about the BRICS and its influence in the world, we are joined now by Ambassador Luiz Augusto de Castro Neves. He is president of the Brazil-China Business Council and former Brazilian ambassador to China. Ambassador, thanks so much for joining us. As I said, Brazil is the host of the BRICS Summit taking place in Rio de Janeiro. Now, BRICS is a very diverse group, as we can see, and many of its members, of course, have their own policies, their own concerns, their own agendas as well. So how does Brazil go about building consensus on some of the critical foreign policy issues that the globe faces today?
Well, first of all, allow me to thank you for having me now with you. Regarding what you said, I would mention a sort of the fact that the world is now in the process of accelerated transition, and international fora or institutions, what they call the international governance architecture, they tend to reflect the realities of the moment. That was the case in 1945 at the end of the World War II, when a new order, international order, was created under the leadership of the United States as the most powerful country at the time. Well, now we are going through a process of accelerated and radical transition as far as the international order is concerned. The present order that we have lived in the second half of this 20th century does not reflect anymore the realities of today. The references have disappeared in some of the cases. The Soviet Union disappeared, and then the emergence of China was a new important data in the present situation. So it's natural, therefore, that BRICS is still trying to search for its role in the international world. Of course, a number of issues that have been put forward. The agenda is being expanded to cover new items of international relationship and international relations, such as, for instance, climate change. So therefore, Brazil, while hosting the BRICS meeting, had to keep up with the fact that we are in a process of an accelerated transition. And so we still are searching for a more precise agenda for the BRICS.
Right, Ambassador, as you say, we are in a time of transition right now, and the order that was established right after World War II with the United States as its leader is now changing. But the United States, as we can hear and see, is not giving up that dominant position very easily. We just had President Trump, who is warning BRICS member countries that if they, quote, align or support what he termed anti-American policies, they will face punishment, and that punishment will be an additional 10% tariff on their exports to the United States. I mean, what do you make of a threat like that, and how does BRICS respond to something like that?
Well, BRICS is not responding to other countries' ideas, actually, as a matter of fact. I think that the United States has been the dominant power over the last 60 or 70 years, or perhaps a little bit more. And it's natural that they want to keep that sort of position. But the realities of today are different. We haven't found yet a new way of engaging ourselves. We are examining a number of situations, a number of problems which were once dealt with by the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. Nowadays, the Security Council has been very, I would say, almost dormant in some cases. But we are having some problems which require an action, a multilateral action, such as the problem, the crisis in the Middle East, which includes Gaza and the Iran, the question of Russia and Ukraine, and also the unilateral acts adopted by the President of the U.S. government, which are creating some difficulties regarding what we had, the situation we had before. So therefore, we are, as I said, and I repeat, going through a process of accelerated transition, and we don't have yet a clear idea of how the future international order will look like.
Now, one of the things that BRICS member states have been doing is that they've been trying to promote trade between member states. I mean, if we look at just trade between China and Brazil, for instance, I mean, there is very robust trade between these two countries. In fact, China imports 25% of its agricultural and livestock imports from Brazil. These include things like soybeans as well as beef as well. I mean, how important is it for a group like BRICS to have more of this intra-country, intra-BRICS trade and lessen their dependence on, let's say, a country like the United States, which has been, as we have seen, using tariffs to punish countries in many instances?
Well, as a matter of fact, China has become our major international trade partner, and we value that very much. But it has not many things to do with BRICS, as a matter of fact. China and Brazil have a very strong relationship as far as trade and investments are concerned, but this doesn't have necessarily, is not necessarily due to our action in the BRICS. As a matter of fact, BRICS seems to be, as I said, as I heard one day, some people saying, a fiction that became a reality. It was not founded on purpose. It's not an international organization. It's merely a forum of countries which are expanding, but whose agenda are still very different among themselves. So therefore, we must yet have before us the challenge of defining a multilateral agenda based on the BRICS. The BRICS, for now, as we see it today, it's a mere forum for exchange of views on the part of the emerging countries, first the 5 founding members of BRICS, and then now with the expansion of more. So we are now 11 members.
In that effort to find its common voice, if I could put it that way, or as you say, to define its multilateral agenda, it has given the Global South a bigger voice, a bigger platform in world affairs, hasn't it?
It has given a bigger voice, but it will remain we're still waiting for a strategy, a long-term strategy, a long-term vision of what we countries, members of the BRICS, are willing to define. So therefore, we have very different international agendas on each member country of the BRICS. So therefore, we have a huge task before us, which is to make this agenda more compatible. I saw this morning on the press, on the Brazilian press, a number of issues that have been mentioned in the final declaration of the BRICS. Some of them are not as deep as we had before, but therefore we still have the challenge before us, how to hammer a common agenda for most countries of the BRICS in having a long-term strategy as a purpose.
Ambassador, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks so much for joining us. Time to bring in our panel here in our studio. Otaviano Canuto is Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. Chidanand Rajghatta is Foreign Editor and U.S. Bureau Chief of the Times of India. He joins us right here in Washington. And from Beijing, we're joined by Einar Tangen. He is a Senior Fellow at the Taihe Institute. Welcome to all of you. Chidanand, let me start with you, and let me start with a statement that was made by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the summit in Rio. He said, global institutions established in the 20th century have not provided adequate voice to 2/3 of humanity. Nations contributing significantly to the world economy don't even have a seat on key decision-making tables. Of course, we know what he's being referring to there. It's reform of the United Nations, especially of the Security Council, other international institutions as well.
Right.
BRICS, as I pointed out with the ambassador a moment ago, is a diverse group. Countries have their own agendas, they have their own concerns, their own policies as well. But on this particular issue of global governance, is there consensus?
Well, I guess, there is consensus among most countries in the BRICS formation, except, of course, the UN Security Council is sort of set in stone, and reform will take a lot of doing. This is a case India has been making for a long time. I think within the BRICS grouping itself, by and large, I can't think of many countries which would object to India getting its seat at the table. Objectively, of course, India is on track to become the 3rd largest economy in the world, at a distant third, of course, behind China and US. So at some point, it will look pretty odd if India does not have a seat at the table, particularly as the world's most populous nation. BRICS is primarily a global South organization, and I think India has been a champion of the global South, not just with BRICS, but even going back to the non-aligned movement and the non-aligned countries and other formations in the South.
Right, Otaviano, good to have you with us in the studio. Now, on this issue of this changing world order that we've been talking about, the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, he said something about that. He was participating in the summit via video because he can't travel. Brazil is a signatory to the International Criminal Court and so would be obligated to arrest him. There's an arrest warrant out for him. But this is what President Putin had to say. Let's listen.
The unipolar system of international relations that served the interests of the so-called golden billion is becoming a thing of the past. It's being replaced by a more just, multipolar world. The process of changing the world's economic order continues to gain momentum. Everything indicates that the model of liberal globalization has become obsolete.
So, Otaviano, have we got to the point now where the post-World War II architecture, the way the world was created at that time, is now changing? I mean, it was dominated by the West for the last 6 or 7 decades, even longer possibly. But it is being challenged right now. It's being challenged by a group like BRICS, and BRICS is in its infancy, but is it a challenge?
It's a pleasure to be here again. See, we have to frame this in the appropriate terms. The BRICS are a heterogeneous group of countries. They don't share necessarily the same view with respect to the relationship with the advanced economies, the industrialized economies, U.S. in particular, but also all the others. So Mr. Putin reflects, let's say, a more radicalized version of what would be the constitution of the BRICS. Whereas I do believe that when you think of India, right, or even Brazil itself or South Africa, they try to walk on a rope to try to exercise, and President Lula clearly tried to exercise a balancing act by avoiding any sort of anti-Western or partial view of what's the role of the BRICS. The BRICS were born as a group of economic and financial cooperation among the constituent countries. Initially, as a way to enhance their power in the reviews of the structure of the multilateral institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions, IMF and the World Bank. And then limits were clear about how far they could go up in their share, and then they created their own multilateral institutions, the New Development Bank and the arrangement of sharing reserves. Right. So it's been typically an economic and financial cooperation agenda and boosting the power, the voice of these countries. It's not an anti-order call. That's not what I understand is the case of most of the, particularly now that you have the entry of new countries that are not allowing themselves as well. You know, you have the disputes between Egypt and Ethiopia about the use of the Nile River. You have, on the one hand, Saudi Arabia as to be member, plus the UAE on the other hand versus Iran. So it is not it's a platform for boosting particularly economic voice, not necessarily institutional voice in the discussions about international order.
Right, okay. Einar Tangen, Einar, you know, if we want to look at some of the responses from the West, well, we had this posting on social media by President Donald Trump. He posted this on his Truth Social website. He said, any country aligning themselves with the anti-American policies of BRICS will be charged an additional 10% tariff. There will be no exceptions to this policy. Thank you for your attention to this matter. That was President Trump. And this is how the Chinese Foreign Ministry responded to that. Let's listen.
We believe that BRICS is a positive force in the international community. Its cooperation is open and inclusive and not targeted at any particular country. As for tariffs, we have consistently opposed tariffs wars and trade wars. We are against using tariffs as a tool for coercion and pressure. Arbitrarily imposing tariffs does not serve the interests of any party.
So, Einar, listening there to what the Chinese Foreign Ministry had to say, and earlier what President Trump had to say, what does this tell us about how the United States views BRICS and what it does?
Well, for Donald Trump, BRICS is a threat, and he said so. But everything is a threat to Donald Trump. Any group or country that stands up to the United States kind of arbitrary economic coercion is something that needs to be batted down with a bunch of tariffs.
There was also an article, Einar, that was published in the Hill newspaper. It's a political newspaper here in Washington, D.C., that claims that the BRICS summit failed even before it started. It says that BRICS is falling apart. This is very much the establishment view of BRICS here.
Well, yes, that's the establishment view within the Beltway, who have convinced themselves that American exceptionalism is somehow a good thing for the rest of the world, and that tariffs and coercion are somehow going to win the day for America. I think outside the Beltway, almost universally, even among allies, close allies like Japan and the EU, definitely Canada and Mexico, they're not feeling much love or understanding from the Beltway.
Chidanand, as we've heard, BRICS was initially formed as an economic grouping, as a grouping where countries could cooperate economically with each other in trade as well. But we have not seen significant intra-BRICS trade between the member states of BRICS. How does that change?
Increasingly, you're starting to see, inter-country trade in other currencies and other currency arrangements between BRICS countries. So I think it's a process, and also this whole, the threat of tariffs and the path that President Trump has adopted of, literally trade bullying and, laying down these threats will increasingly sensitize countries to the fact that it does not pay in the long run to have U.S. as just the one major trading partner. Everyone's trying to diversify now. For instance, Brazil, which is hosting the current BRICS, I think India has made outreaches to have their own, to up their bilateral trade, as also many other BRICS countries. The difficulty here is that many countries within the BRICS, formation, which is very heterogeneous, there are countries very dependent on the U.S. There are countries which are rather closely allied to the U.S. As we got onto the program, I noticed that President Trump has released letters he's written to Japan and South Korea announcing a 25% tariff on each of them for not concluding a deal by the July 9 deadline. So yeah, I mean, it'll take a long time. It's not, there's no one solution.
What is your view on that?
The declaration of the leaders was clearly an exercise of balancing act. It makes a defense, it calls for multilateralism, while at the same time not naming specifically any country, the U.S. policies and so on. And also it's a balancing act on other topics, even when it mentions the Iran. It's careful enough not to mention or make a statement about the U.S. or Israel and so on. So it's a balancing act. The only topic of the agenda that might be taken as underpinning Mr. Trump's attitude is the rising use of local currencies in bilateral trade. That's the only area where, because in principle, the rising use of local currencies would allow those countries to economize on their need to resort to reserves in dollars or euros for the trade financing as cushions for the bilateral trade financing. And our colleague is right in saying that the trade is still higher between individual countries and the U.S., with some exceptions. The trade between Brazil and China has become bigger, in Brazil's standpoint, than the one with the U.S. So the trade is far, among the BRICS countries, is far from being as high as it could reach, but at the same time, it has become significant. So the only point of the agenda that might be confounded as a threat would be frankly, the use of local currencies, which has been very tiny. See, Brazil and China have an agreement to use local currencies, potentially, but in fact, it has not even been used that much. So it doesn't make any profound sense, this reaction by Mr. Trump. Is Mr. Trump using tariffs in the way that he has been doing?
Einar Tangen, if we look at one issue where there may be some areas of common ground, that's in the fight against climate change. In fact, there was a report from the energy think tank Ember, and it finds that the 10 BRICS countries accounted for more than half, 51% of global solar electricity generation in 2024. That's up from 15% just a decade ago. And we know that China is a world leader in alternative energy generation, in the transition to green sources of energy. I mean, what can you tell us about how these countries can do more in this particular regard, especially at a time when the United States under President Trump is now rolling back most initiatives on green energy?
Well, he hasn't rolled it back. He's decided to kill off the solar industry in the United States, and that leaves China. In terms of doing more, these countries are facing a situation where the United States, because of its actions and the uncertainty that is being caused by Trump's tariffs on again, hot and cold, madman tactics, is hurting the global economy. And there's no question about that. He has made it clear that he thinks this is great tactics, but in actuality, it's just an incredibly silly way of approaching economics. So at this point, these countries are looking at less. They want to be less dependent. They're de-risking from the United States because it's no longer reliable, not predictable. And certainly all this kind of coercive action that is being taken and threats do not help. BRICS is trying to positively affect, for the people of their countries and the world, a better environment. And the United States is trying to reassert its hegemony and basically play this kind of Hunger Games issue where everybody is supposed to support the United States.
Right. Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.